Okay, first of all, I want to discuss another channel that's on the American Arms channel. I'm sure some of you watch it. I watch it as well. They also cover a lot of 10 gauge information, much of it quite useful. And I generally agree with most of what the person on the channel says. However, I wanted to point out something because I'm cautious about this. He was talking about reloading a shell using the VT-40, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, that gunpowder that I never use because I don't have any recipes for it. Then he made a load of it and it seemed to be successful. But what I wanted to discuss was primer substitution. He mentioned primer substitution, and he had substituted, I think, a Winchester primer in a Remington shell or something like that. And he said in there that it didn't make much difference, but I am in disagreement with that statement because in Ballistic Products' own data on their encyclopedia, reloading encyclopedia, the Advantages manual, or it may have been actually in the Status Steel manual. It has a table in there that shows a certain load using different primers in the same hull, and they had different pressures. And actually there was a big difference in some of the pressures, and some of them were kind of getting close to the edge. So if you're running a load that's already close to the edge on pressure, and then you substitute a primer with higher pressure, it may turn out good. It may not turn out good for you. Oh, it's probably not going to blow your gun out. But it could split the shell out, which could cause some damage to the gun, because I've had that happen using a recipe that I made up in my own mind because I didn't have one, and it turned out to be a little too much powder, but it could be a similar situation, substituting primers. It ended up, the back of the shell split out, and pressed paper from Federal's base wad went all through my gun, and it actually, the pressure, it generated enough pressure, it actually bent metal components, and I never could get them exactly right after that, and I ended up taking the gun to a gunsmith, and it cost me a bunch of money to get it repaired correctly. So I would definitely caution you on substituting primers. The one primer you definitely can substitute and get away with is the CCI, not necessarily the CCI-M Magnum primer, but the CCI primer, just the plain CCI 209. It is a pretty low pressure primer. I just felt that I had to mention this because I think this is an important fact. Now, I don't know, maybe he has a way of testing them, but unless he has a test barrel with a gauge attached to it, I don't see how he can actually know if there's any real difference in pressure, because using a seat of the pants test really isn't very scientific. You're using a semi-auto gun as well, which takes away some of the pressure, so it's even harder to tell the difference than it would be using a gun that doesn't absorb some of the pressure. Anyway, that's my opinion. He may not share the opinion. Some of you may not, but I felt it was important to bring that up. Now, on to the reloading. Okay, a brief history of hulls. In the early black powder days, they were all brass, the whole thing, so which made a very sturdy hull. And then later on, they started substituting plastic, paper with brass, which I'm not sure I have any. I will check and see. You'll have to excuse the crudity of this drawing. This shell isn't very straight, but I can't draw a straight line on it all that good. But anyway, they of course went to paper and brass at the bottom to reinforce where the main powder charge was. And then later on they went to plastic and brass, or steel. And sometimes it's steel that looks like brass. But the thing is, okay, now there's a couple different types of hulls. There's tapered ones and there's straight ones. And the tapered ones, this right here is the base wad. Here's a primer hole where the primer goes. And of course your powder charge goes here, and then your gas seal or whatever wads you need, and then your shot. And this is a straight hull. I believe it's called a Rothenhauser design or something like that. Anyway, there's also tapered hulls that the base wad will come up like this. You'll have a taper to the bottom of it. And it's important to know because the straight line hulls are almost always used for magnum loads, heavy payloads with lots of shot. And the tapered hulls are often used for target loads, skeet, stuff like that. The tapered hulls are not designed for a magnum payload. The reason is, if you have your powder charge down here and your shot cup is way down here, or if you're using gas seal, if it's down low enough it can get hung up on the taper, and it may not go down all the way to where it needs to go to press the powder down, in which case you can end up with what I call a dud, or they call a blooper, which it fires but it doesn't have full power. It might just go pop, and you can see your pellets go out the end of the barrel. And usually that occurs at the most inopportune time, naturally. Anyway, I got some different hulls here. This hunting buddy of mine, he gave me, he had someone, a friend of his left a whole bunch of reloads at his house, and they were there for years actually. And so he gave me the reloads, and I'm going to have to take apart some of them. Some of them I don't have any idea what they consist of, lead or steel. Some of them you can tell easily, and some you don't know. But I've got a variety of hulls here. Here's one with really super high brass. This is an old Imperial hull. I don't know how many of you out there can remember that brand, Imperial. I used to shoot them when I was a kid when I had a 410. My stepdad would buy me Imperial shotgun shells. And they would have real high brass, like this one. Usually the high brass is used in a heavier load, but anymore the shells are sturdy enough to where you can create a pretty heavy load with a low brass shell. With that being said, you still want to watch the taper business that I discussed. Okay, here's the AA hull. It's definitely a tapered hull. And now see this one here, I'm going to have to take this apart. In fact, if you look close, you need to get it in some light. If you look close here, this one's probably been reloaded too many times already. See how it's different colored right here? That plastic is probably brittle right there where it's got ash deposits. The color's changed from reloading so much. So I'm probably going to just take the components out of here and throw the thing away. It's probably not worth using. You've got pretty much all of your 10 gauge hulls, 3.5 inch, are straight lined hulls. So you don't have to worry about that. That's a Federal hull there, which has a compressed paper base wad. Winchester Hall, which has a plastic base wad. I don't know how well you can see in here. And I've noticed that there's not a lot of difference with the 10 gauge 3.5 inch hulls. I've noticed there's not a lot of difference with the load pressures, or so it seems. The velocity stays pretty constant. Whether you're using a Winchester hull or a Remington hull, it seems like they perform about the same with the same recipe. You can look up a recipe that might be designed for Winchester hulls, and it would perform pretty much the same in a Remington hull with 10 gauge, I've noticed. And of course, here's where I give you the disclaimer. I'm not telling you how to reload shells, so if you reload, you do it on your own, at your own risk. So, I couldn't afford a lawsuit. Anyway, here's another hull. This is an old Winchester Western game load, duck and pheasant. Number 6 shot originally, but it's a reload. Don't know what's actually in it. Here's another AAA. I think this is an earlier AAA. AAA design, they changed their design. And in fact, Ballistic Products actually have a couple of, you can go on the website, and the curmudgeon, as they call them, has a couple of recipes for using the AAA hulls for duck loads. It's a real light, fast load. The powder charge goes up high enough to where you don't have to worry about the wad hanging up on where it's tapered. And I've actually made those loads. I used one of them on a pheasant, and it was quite effective. It's a real high velocity light load of steel, and they work really good. And the upshot of it is that the AAA hulls are very durable. They can withstand a lot of reloads. They're a very sturdy, well-built hull. And something else I wanted to discuss about hulls, I don't know if I should erase that, but inside the barrel, which happens to be at a slant, you have the shell crooked as it is. Okay, and then of course it opens. Inside the chamber, you got the chamber, which ends, we'll say this is a 12 gauge 3 inch or 10 gauge 3.5 inch shell. And then of course you have the chamber, and then you have what's called the forcing cone. It goes down a little bit, and then goes on. And of course this is not drawn to scale. At the end of the barrel you have, of course, the choke, which reduces the size even more. Anyway, what I wanted to say about this, about the forcing cone, is most of the time the forcing cone isn't real long. It's like 3/4 of an inch. And so, that being the case, the forcing cone, actually the forcing cone starts a little bit later. You have room for the crimp. The crimp has to be able to open. When they say it's a 3 inch shell or a 3.5 inch shell, they are talking about when it is shot, when it is open. It's 3.5 inches all the way open. Now I found this varies a little bit. Sometimes the Remington hulls or the Winchesters might be a little longer or shorter, but they're roughly 3.5 inches in 10 gauge. And the 2 7/8 inches are pretty hard to come by. I haven't even found where you can order them. You can, however, order vintage shells there's a company that designs old-fashioned shot shells, and you can order loads that are like for pheasants and stuff like that in 10 gauge and 2 7/8 inch. Or, as a reloader, you can cut them down and take the crimp off, and you're roughly at 3 inches or 2 7/8 inch, and you can roll crimp or fold crimp those for the shorter length. But the reason I mention this, okay, say the chamber's 3" or 3.5" in a 10 gauge, and okay, say it's a 3" chamber in 12 gauge, and you stuff a 3.5" shell in it. Now you have trouble doing that with a semi-auto, but with, say, a break open type action type of gun, they'll go in there. They'll go right in there, no problem. The problem is, when your crimp opens up, it's opening up into the forcing cone, not into the chamber, because the chamber is not designed for the longer shell. And what this does is drastically increases the pressure back into the shell, because it's not going to open quite all the way. So you're forcing everything, the components of the shell, through a smaller hole. So they might go in there, and you might think, hey, I can shoot 3.5" in this 3" chamber, but I don't think you're really gaining anything. And in fact, you may be in danger of splitting the shell out, or maybe even damaging the weapon. So it's not a good idea to do it. I know some people do it. My first stepdad that hunted used to do it. He had a 2 3/4" chamber in his old model 37 Winchester single shot, and he put 3" shells in it all the time. And he'd say, well, they looked kind of funny when I took them out. It's like they didn't open all the way. Well, that's because they were opening into the forcing cone. Fortunately, the firearm was built sturdy enough. He never ran into any problems, but you just never know. You don't want to take a chance. Firearms, you never know where they're built, and they may be built somewhere inferior. You never know. Like Browning's built in Japan. I mean, they appear to be really good firearms, but I wouldn't take a chance with any of them, just for safety's sake. Anyway, I thought I'd cover that. That's an important safety tip that I think should definitely be discussed. Okay, now I'm going to discuss hull condition, because this is very important. When you pick up your hulls, or anyone else's hulls that you decide to salvage, before you reload them, it's very important to look at them closely. Make sure there's no problems. Like the aforementioned Imperial hull, I would like to use this. I would love to be able to use a shell with brass this high, even though it's probably immaterial. But this hull is more than likely going in the garbage because of the discoloration. You know the plastic's going to be more brittle when that happens. This one, why am I going to throw this away? It's been out of shape, it's been stepped on, so it's no good. This is one of my tungsten shells from last year. Until you look at it, there's nothing discolored. It's not quite as clear as it was before, but it's okay. There's no splitting. You look for splitting around the rim. I don't know how well you can see this. I'm not sure where it blurs at, what range. This is not the camera I usually use. It's on the charger. I went to do this video and all my batteries for it were dead, so this one is 720p, so it's not quite as good as 1080 or 4K, but hopefully you can still see enough detail, because back in the day when high def first came out, 720 was the cat's meow. Anyway, that one's good. It can be used. There's a Winchester hull. I've taken the primer out. That's another thing you can do too when you remove the primer, is see if you can see anything wrong with the base wad. You know, if it's cracked or there's big chunks gone out of it or something. Definitely don't use it. Also, you should check the size. I believe Matt makes a resizer, or not a resizer, a size tool that has go and no go. It has the holes that are the diameter of the shells, and you check them, put the shells in there, and you'll know if they'll go or not, because if they're too swelled out after resizing, they're going to give you problems when you go to put them in the gun. They're going to stick, they may not come out, which is always irritating when you're shooting and the shell sticks in the chamber and there's more geese coming and you can't shoot and you have to take the gun apart, or you have to put together your cleaning rod so you can get the shell out of there real quick, and it's not a good position to be in. Here's a 20 gauge shell, and this one here, this is one that I fired recently and it's okay. Grip looks good. Let's see if I can find one with a forward clamp. Most of these look okay. I've been pretty good at trying to pre-screen them before I even go to reload them. Well, I don't see, right offhand, I don't see any really bad ones. So that's good. But, you know, you may look at them and determine they're alright to start with, but it's always good to double check them before you actually go to reload them. Because I had one time I didn't do that with, and I reloaded it, and then I got to looking at it, and I had to take it apart and not use the hull because it probably would have failed on me. Oh yes, another thing. One of my viewers had mentioned, asked me if I'd had a problem with shell separation at the brass. And he asked specifically if it was on Federal hulls. Well, yes, I have. But not just on Federal hulls. I've had it happen on Remington hulls, and I've had it happen on Winchester hulls as well. It's actually not that unusual of an occurrence. Usually it's from reloading too many times. Or, what happened with me was, I used a faster burning powder. If I can find it here. Oh, E3, this is a pretty fast burning powder. Here's the one. I hate this powder. I absolutely hate it. I find it unique. But, during the Obama administration, I could not find Alliance steel powder. And that's pretty much all I had recipes for. And this was readily available at Walmart. So I scarfed it up. I thought, well, I'll just estimate, you know. Well, I don't think I have any of those holes around here. I'm moving from a flooded trailer and everything. I may have lost them. But I had, let's see if I can find it. I don't see it. I had a hull that had split. What it did was, it was a Federal hull. It had split right here, right on the edge. It had split and bulged out, and the fiber wad had came out and went all through the weapon, all through the action of the weapon. And there was enough pressure in there it actually bent components in there. That was one time. Another time what happened was, let's see, was it I think it was a Remington hull. And I had used this powder right here, HS6. And the recipe was within the norms of what it was according to the recipe, but it was very cold out. It was cold out, and the shell tested fine. I mean, I tested the recipe during the summertime, and it was great. It had high velocity and everything. And this was a swatter load that I designed for geese that were already injured to finish them off. I think I used steel number 5s, as a matter of fact. And I think I was using I can't remember for sure if I was using the over and under or one of the BPS, one of the pumps. I think it was the over and under, but I could be wrong. Anyway, I had knocked the goose down. The video's in there somewhere in that collection. But I'd knocked the goose down, it broke the wingtip, and it'd come down, and I finally found where it was in the tall grass, and it took off down a hill, and it had enough of its wing left. It really got moving. I couldn't have chased it and caught it running. And I had that swatter load in there, and I shot at it, and it was pretty good distance by the time I got an aim on it. Boom! And I couldn't tell if it fell or not. I thought it did, but I wasn't sure. And I pulled the shell out, and all there was just the brass. That's all that was left. I don't know where the rest of it went. It wasn't inside the barrel. The plastic was long gone. And I searched the area, and eventually I found the bird, and one single number 5 pellet hit it in the back. I think it hit it in the lung, and it finished it off. The shell worked, it was effective, but the case was no longer any good. It had separated, and I have no idea where the plastic went. I never found it. Kind of an interesting story. But anyway, you look for that. You look for when they had paper shells, because they used to have paper. When my stepdad and I were reloading shooting lead before they mandated steel, and we were making leaky loads, didn't have plastic shot cups. We had fiber wads, in which required a lot higher wad pressure to keep them from misfiring. I think the wad pressure was like 70, 80 pounds, at least 60. With the plastic shot cups, you can get by with like 20. Anyway, what would happen with the 10 gauge Winchester hulls, because my stepdad Dennis would use those, after a few reloadings, they'd start getting these little holes, these little tiny burn through holes right just above the brass where the paper joined the brass, which eventually, of course, they'd blow off, but they get those little, they start burning through, and that was the signal when it was time to throw them away. Another thing too is sometimes blow the crimp clear off. You'd go to take the shell out of the gun and there was no crimp. It was gone. I've had it happen with plastic shells too, where it blew the crimp clear off, or blew part of the crimp off. If the crimp is brittle, burned, or split, like where the folds are, if it's splitting, don't use it. It's not worth using. It's not worth taking a chance. I've used them, tried to stretch them out for more life, and it's bit me in the butt. I'd end up taking aim on something and pop, and I'd see the pellets go out the barrel. And it was very frustrating. Sometimes the wad would stick in the barrel, which is something you got to watch for if you have a dud, because you need to get that wad out of the barrel, because even though it's not very strong of an obstruction, the sudden power of another shell behind it can cause bulging of the metal in the barrel. This happened to my stepdad. It was a Post-Private Spain or Mercury 10 gauge side by side. He'd had 5 10 gauges during his life, and he's still alive. I don't want to sound like the past tense, but he had 5 different 10 gauges, and 4 of them were double barrel side by side. And he had sold one of them later to someone, and the guy looked down. He had this problem with duds, and sometimes the wad would be stuck in the barrel, and he'd just shoot it out with another shell, not thinking anything about it. But when he went to sell this gun to someone else, the guy was looking down the barrel, and he said, "Look, these little bulge spots along the barrel." The guy said, "Well, the barrel's got some bulge spots." And Dennis said, "Well, it's still killing geese." So the guy bought it from him. Don't know if anything bad happened. I mean, it was still shooting, but it's definitely not a good thing. So you definitely want to make sure there's no obstruction of the barrel if you have a dud, which can be created by using a bad hull. It's also important, I know I talked about powders last time, but it's important to have a good variety of gunpowder to use. Little gun works great for 20 gauge. And this, the last couple of years, this has been my backbone powder. Before, it was steel, which is still a really good powder. But I'm not going to go too much, I'll digress from that. I don't want to get too much into powder. I already discussed that in the previous video. Another thing about the hulls and primers is that Cheddite hulls, there's prime Cheddite hull, they come like this. Ordered these from Ballistic Products. Brand new, ready to go. And you put the crimp on them, whether you roll crimp them or fold crimp them. Roll crimping is something I will cover in a later reloading video, not in this one. But they come with the Cheddite primers. Now I've noticed that Fiocchi and Cheddite both seem to have a slight difference in the diameter of the primer hole, because if you go to use a CCI primer in a Cheddite or a Fiocchi hull, hope I'm pronouncing Fiocchi correct, and I notice they fit kind of loose in there. And you can get them in, there's a little resistance when you put them in, not very much. I mean, you about push them in with your fingers. And then what happens is that you go to put wad pressure on it, and you take the shell out of the press, and you notice the primer is like sticking out slightly from the bottom. You can put it back in the press and force it in there, but I don't like that. The way I deal with that is if I don't have Cheddite primers or Fiocchi primers, because the two seem to be the same size. But I don't know about the water, I don't know about the pressure between the two, if it's any different. Don't know about that. But if I have one of those hulls and I have CCI primers to put in there, I use this little device right here. This is a primer pocket conditioner. Shell sits on here like this. It's got a little ridge that sticks up. Sits on there like that. And then this goes into there. Through the primer hole, which is supposed to just go right in there, but this one seems to be obstructed for some reason. Anyway, put it in there like so. And then you beat it with a hammer a few times. And what that does is it tightens up the primer pocket, and you can actually fit those primers in there and they'll stay in there. They'll be much tighter. This is a good tool to have. Whoops. Primer pocket conditioner for hulls that have been reloaded more than once. Sometimes the primer pocket gets a little loose, and you can rejuvenate it with this, providing the hull is usable. Ideally, it would be best to only use hulls one time. You know, buy them like this, brand new. I think I have some Federals too. Well, here's some 12 gauge Fiocchi hulls, brand new, primered, ready to go. I thought I had some 10 gauge. Maybe not. There's more Fiocchi ones. I wanted to buy more clear ones, but at the time I ordered, they were out of them, so I got these green ones. Well, I had, what do I got here? There's 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch primed hull Fiocchi. have the Fiocchi primer and they're ready to go. These are great for making reloads with heavyweight number 7 for knocking down snow geese and Canadas if they're not too high. I thought I had several hulls that were new, but I can't seem to find them. Well, maybe I don't. I was going to reorganize this shop during my vacation week off, during my factory shutdown. Unfortunately, that didn't happen because some bozo, driving like a maniac, decided to crash into our electric meter and wipe out our electricity. And we were without power for a whole day, and then I had to rent a generator, and I was so busy putting out fires, fixing things, and everything else. We never took a vacation, never went anywhere, and I didn't get the shop organized. Go figure. And right now I'm in the process of trying to get my money back for renting the generator and paying for the food that went bad after the first day in the refrigerator and all that stuff. This house is up on a hill, and the meter for electricity is down by the street, it's down below it. And when the guy crashed into the meter, the impact was severe enough that it actually pulled the wires down, and our box for our main breaker outside the house, it actually pulled the switch down. So I had to have an electrician, a licensed electrician, rebuild that box, and they had to run brand new wire underground up the hill from the meter, and they had to put a new meter in, and I mean I haven't got the bill from them yet, but I'm sure it's going to be really high. Thus far we already spent a bunch of money on the generator and all that stuff. But the guy's car insurance company is supposed to pay for all this, and I have a claim, and they've already agreed to it, so hopefully there won't be any problems. The guy doesn't deny crashing into the meter. He fled the scene of the accident, by the way, which his billfold, his wallet, fell out when he flipped his car, and it landed on its wheels. It fell out through his open window, and the police had his ID and everything, so it was a no-brainer. They had him within like 30 minutes. But the whole thing was frustrating and irritating and scary at first, because I had heard a noise and our power went out, and I thought possibly burglars had knocked our breaker out and they were going to storm our house. I thought it was going to be a home invasion. And I was headed to the door with a Mossberg Shockwave, ready to engage them. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. And I opened the door and looked out and see this guy trying to drive away, with sparks coming out from underneath his car. I yelled at him to come back. He didn't. He kept going. But they got him. It was more excitement than I'd planned during my rest and relaxation period. But I digress. Back to the reloading. Anyway, that's why I didn't get the shop reorganized, which I'm still trying to work on. Trying to think of what else. Oh yeah, crimping. Okay. Once a hull's been crimped, of course, it has the memory, and so when you run it in the press, it'll crimp easier the next time. But what happens is they get fatigued after a while, and the fold crimp won't stay down. It'll start coming up. I think I might have one I can show you. What I see one here. Now these are all crimped pretty good. But oh, here's another one that shouldn't have been used right here. I don't personally know this guy that reloaded these, but I think he should have screened these a little better. See this right here? See how that's cracked right there? This might be okay, but he's pushing the envelope on this hull. It's something you really shouldn't do. If I could afford it, I would just buy the hulls and just use them the one time, get rid of them, buy new hulls every time. But I know you can pretty much get 4 uses out of a hull with no problems. I've never had any problems with hulls using them like 4 times. No problem at all. When I get up to around 7 times, I start getting problems with the discoloration and the crimp cracking. I start running into a lot of that. Sometimes the whole top of the hull will be discolored. You get up around 7, that's usually about the maximum for a lot of them, and some of them don't make it that far. But there's been hulls I've reloaded 10 times and it was a bad idea. I've had them completely come apart. You see a big muzzle flash where the fire goes out through the barrel because the powder's not burning right because the shell came apart. Another thing you can get when you're reloading is one of these blocks. I bought one of these. I'm not endorsing any products, by the way. I'm just, and no one sponsors me. I bought this. I thought it'd be easier. Because what happens is I'll have stuff in here ready to crimp, and then I'll knock the thing over and the shot goes everywhere. Because I'm kind of a klutz. This hopefully will help. Anyway, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a load during this video and come up with some data. I'm going to make an ITX load. Remember the ITX video that I did recently? I mainly bought this ITX shot for use of the Ithaca 10 gauge because it's an older gun. It was designed for lead shot. Although everyone I've talked to that has one has shot steel through it with no problems. But I thought this would be great. This will go. This is supposed to be very responsive to chokes, so you can run this through a full choke with no problem. And I will shoot some through the Terror Tube 720 and maybe even the 705 just to see how it patterns on paper. And I may use it in the field too. It's softer than steel, but it's a little harder than Magnum lead. So it'll hold together better. So it should have good penetration. It's got roughly the mass of bismuth, between bismuth and lead. This is supposed to be 10. Lead is 11. Bismuth is like 9.9 or something, I think. Anyway, I was looking through the tables here. I come up with the recipe for, let's see, 10 gauge 3.5 using HS6 powder. Yeah, let's do that. It'll have a velocity of 1550 feet per second according to this table. PSI would be 10,000. 1 1/4 ounce of shot. That's what they recommended. Ballistic Products recommends using lighter, faster loads with the ITX. So that's what I'm going to do. So let me grab a hull. Actually, that is, yeah, Federal. Okay, good. I can use this one that's sitting right here as a matter of fact. Or, well, I don't know where my new ones are. So I guess I will be using this one. Anyway, this, take the primer out, resize it. And see if we get a Federal primer. I do. Federal primer. This is a 209A, which I think is supposed to have a little bit supposed to be a little harder than the plain primer. And I do, and here. Take a quick look at the primer pocket. No big gaps. Primer pocket looks good. And in there nicely. This was a Black Cloud 10 gauge lobe, by the way. Number 2. Which I had that whole box of those things. I don't think I killed a damn thing with them, which was disappointing. Now, something else you should buy for reloading. Doesn't have much to do with hulls, but if you can find them, I don't know if they still make them, but I bought this used. I think I got it on eBay. A Lee powder measure kit. This has all these little scoops in it, different sizes, and it has a data table for different types of powder and how many grains it's supposed to take with each scoop. Okay, for instance, I don't know how well you can see this, but if I look up, well, he's like IMR 4895, which is a powder I never use. Anyway, the measure number 3.10, no, okay, measure 2.20 is 6.9 grains of that powder. Or, I put in, that's not very many grains of powder. I don't know what you use that on. Okay. Not familiar with that gunpowder, so we'll find something I am familiar with. Let's see. Unique, here we go, the gunpowder I hate. Unique, okay, with like the 4.30 measure number, you get 19.4. Oh, wait a minute. Where'd it go? Yeah, 39.4 grains. That looks right. 39.4 grains of unique with the 4.30 measure, which is, I think I've got it out. Yeah. This great big one here. And some of them are on the table. Anyway, this is a really good tool, man. Unless you're just going to put the powder in here and put the bushing in here and do it that way. Personally, I prefer to hand load it. Now, what was I using? HS6. When I reload, I usually put on some appropriate motivational music, like maybe Rush or something else. But I would caution you, if you're someone who gets distracted easily, you shouldn't play music or anything while you're reloading, because you got to pay attention to what you're doing. You don't want to put too much powder in or too much shot in, especially if you're loading hard shot like steel shot. You can get away with some errors with lead pretty easily, but not with steel. Okay, so we got the primer in there, and we're going to use HS6. And where did my dad? Full print. 46 grains of HS6. Pretty good amount of HS6. HS6 is, I think I've got 2 containers of HS6. Maybe not. I had 2 of them, maybe I used. Oh, here it is. Okay. 46. Zero the scale. Not sure you can see. Zero the scale. And then 0. And that's good. There's a little adjustment here on the bottom. Okay, 46. So we'll go to 45 and 1. Okay. HS6 is really fine powder, little tiny granules. Meters pretty well. Stuff like steel and blue dot, they have trouble metering through a machine because they got big, huge flakes. Got a little bit too much there. Okay, that's about right. Okay. Now, put that in here. Now it calls for a gas seal, which I have around here. Probably I had. Here they are. And they pour all over the floor. I really got to organize this place so I can use it more efficiently. By the way, something else I want to bring up. Where is that? Where did I put it? I coated all my plastic wads and stuff with this stuff called mica wad slit. It's a dry lubricant, and it does not affect your load. It doesn't affect pressures or anything like that. But it helps the wad go through the shotgun barrel smoother, which is always a plus. Okay, so now the gas seal. And you can buy a ram, but I just use my primer pocket conditioner as a ram, just to make sure that's down all the way. I'm such a klutz. Okay, now PT4 1044 wad, which I've got right here. Normally, if I was going to reload a bunch of shells, I'd have all the stuff out ready to go. But I always made sure the pedals are open, because they got little plastic tabs holding them together, and I don't count on them to come apart like they're supposed to. I just don't. I had a Winchester turkey load, a factory load, where one of the pedals didn't open. So, it could happen. Put that down. Don't want to push it down too hard because it's got I don't want to compress it. As it is, it's sitting too low already. I don't know why that is. Oh, I'm supposed to use 2 gas seals. Okay. So, that's why. Take that out of there. Pull that back out. There we go. So put another gas seal on it. Supposed to have 2. Duh. Be sure to carefully read the instructions. Don't just I have the other one sitting up here as a matter of fact. Yeah, that may not be a 10-gauge one. Yep, it is. Okay. We'll put the other gas seal in there. sure that's all the way down. Okay. Now this should come out just about right. I didn't do any real damage to this, so this is a fold crimp. Yeah, pretty close. Okay. Now, the shot. 1 1/4 ounce. Yep. So, a little scale here. Oops. Tough on there. Okay. Underneath 1 1/4. Okay. I need to eat something. Getting shaky from hunger. Put that in there. Like so. You see it come out pretty good. Sitting there right at the top of the cup, which is where it should go. Now, a little overshot wad. You don't necessarily need this with large shot, but I use them. I always use them because it helps level everything. Yeah, we'll put a little wide pressure on there. How about that? And there we go. That one's ready to go. So, here's my marker. Right on the IPS. And HS6, so I know what powder I'm using. 1 1/4. So I wrote on there. You can have different ways of writing it on there. When we go into roll crimping later, when I discuss roll crimping, you can also write it. You'll be able to write it on the overshot card with a extra fine point. I'm anxious to test this out. I might test it later today, but who knows. I still have this leaky load that I made for the 20 gauge I have not tested yet. And one of the things I used to test with chronograph. This is a handy machine to have. Tells you how fast the shot charge is going. Now it can give you a misleading reading if it's not, depending on how bright it is outside. You can use the little covers that go over it or not. Sometimes it can give you a misleading reading, so I mean, if you shoot through there and it says velocity is like 800, it's probably off. Or it might say 2,500 or something like that. That don't make any sense. It could be a little piece of debris too that went over the little sensor, because it's got a sensor at the front and the back, and it measures the time it takes to go from the front to the back. Normally with the shot charge it's fairly accurate, but sometimes you can get faulty readings. I mean, the ones that outfits like Ballistic Products use, they use real super high dollar ones, and most of us can't possibly afford. But generally, the regular ones I use are usually sufficient. Looking at this thing, looks more like some sort of guided missile than it does a gun with a shell in it. Anyway, I want to really thank everyone for watching my channel and supporting me, whether it's just through viewing or actually adding a financial contribution. I definitely thank my patrons for their effort and everyone else that's stuck with my channel all this time. And let's see. Yes, actually that's a small kid. If you want to support me on Patreon, or just want to think about it, you can go to I think that's E. That's terrible, forgetting how stuff's spelled. Anyway, www.patreon.com/zcoop. You can go there and decide to support me or not. Definitely your support is welcome. Costs money to do this. Doesn't really cost much of anything to run the camera. I mean, how much does it cost to charge the battery up for a camera? Probably just pennies, if that. But the gas money to go on the trips for hunting and the hunting supplies, that's what costs money. So it definitely does cost money to do this. I enjoy doing these videos. I really enjoy sharing my knowledge with you, and I know that you guys will call me out if I'm wrong on something and you know it, and spot something that I'm incorrect on. You'll call me out, so, and that's fine. You know, I don't want to go on spewing a bunch of ignorant stuff, you know. So I try to get my facts together before I provide information. But if I'm in error, always let me know. Or just let me know if you like it in the comments or what you think. Hit the thumbs up button if you would. It definitely helps to keep it going on YouTube. Helps the algorithm. That way you'll find more like videos, hopefully. Anyway, appreciate everyone watching, and I'm going to get something to eat. Thank you.